The morning my daughter Emma decided to destroy me in front of my closest friends was supposed to be the happiest day I'd had in months. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping my lavender tea and watching the sunrise paint my garden in shades of gold, when I heard her heels clicking angrily down the hardwood stairs. It was barely 7 in the morning, and Emma never woke up before noon when she was home from college, but there she was, storming into my kitchen like a hurricane in designer pajamas. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong when she burst through the front door at midnight the night before, slamming it so hard that my antique mirror rattled on the wall. Emma had always been dramatic, but this felt different. More calculated, more cruel. "We need to talk," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She was holding her phone in one hand and a stack of papers in the other, and the look on her face was pure contempt. Not disappointment, not anger, but genuine disgust, like I was something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "My name is Victoria Sterling, and at 53, I thought I had mastered the art of being a good mother. For 24 years, I had devoted my entire existence to raising Emma, sacrificing my own dreams, my career, and even my marriage to ensure she had every opportunity I never did. I had been a single mother since Emma was 8, when her father decided that family life was too restrictive for his artistic ambitions, and moved to Portland with his 25-year-old photography assistant. I rebuilt my life around Emma's needs. When she wanted to take violin lessons, I worked double shifts at the accounting firm to pay for them. When she decided she wanted to attend private school, I took out a second mortgage on our house. When she needed a car for her 16th birthday, I gave her mine and took the bus to work for 2 years while I saved for another one. Every decision I made was filtered through one simple question: what would be best for Emma? Our house in Maplewood Heights reflected that devotion. The 3-bedroom colonial had been my grandmother's, and I'd inherited it when Emma was 10. Instead of selling it and moving somewhere more affordable, I'd spent every spare dollar renovating it into the kind of home I thought Emma deserved. Her bedroom was a teenage paradise, with custom built-in shelving, a window seat overlooking the garden, and enough space for all the art supplies, books, and clothes that marked the stations of her growing up. The living room showcased Emma's achievements like a museum of maternal pride. Her honor roll certificates from middle school, her first-place ribbon from the regional science fair, photographs from her high school graduation, where she'd been valedictorian. The piano I'd sacrificed 6 months of dinners out to buy sat in the corner, sheet music still scattered across its top from the last time she'd played, 3 years ago, when she'd decided music was juvenile. I had always been proud of Emma's ambition. She was brilliant, driven, and absolutely gorgeous, with my dark hair and her father's striking green eyes. She'd been accepted to Northwestern University with a partial academic scholarship, and I'd been so proud that I'd framed her acceptance letter and hung it in my office at work. My colleagues had gotten tired of hearing me brag about my daughter's accomplishments, but I couldn't help myself. Emma was my greatest achievement, the proof that I'd done something right with my life. But somewhere between her freshman year and now, halfway through her senior year, something had shifted. Emma's phone calls home had become less frequent, then shorter, then almost perfunctory. When she did call, our conversations felt stilted, like she was checking items off a list rather than actually wanting to talk to me. Her visits home had the same quality, like she was fulfilling an obligation rather than enjoying time with her mother. I told myself it was normal. College students were supposed to become independent, to grow beyond their childhood relationships. I'd read all the parenting books about launching adult children, and they all said the same thing. This distance was healthy, necessary, a sign that I'd raised her well. But the books hadn't prepared me for how much it would hurt to feel like a stranger to the person I loved most in the world. The change had been most obvious during her winter break, just 2 months ago. Emma had spent most of her time in her room, scrolling through her phone or video chatting with friends from school. When I suggested we have a movie night, our old tradition from when she was younger, she'd looked at me like I'd suggested we play with dolls. When I'd asked about her classes, her friends, her plans after graduation, her answers were monosyllabic and dismissive. "You wouldn't understand," had become her favorite phrase. "It's complicated," was her second favorite. I'd started to feel like an intruder in my own home, tiptoeing around my daughter's moods and trying desperately to find some topic of conversation that wouldn't result in eye-rolling or sighs of exasperation. But I'd kept trying because I believed that underneath all the college sophistication and newfound worldliness, my little girl was still there. The Emma who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd made me breakfast in bed every Mother's Day, who'd cried when I'd had to work late and miss her school play. I'd been certain that once she graduated and started her real life, we'd find our way back to each other. Now, standing in my kitchen with that look of pure contempt on her face, I realized how naive I'd been. "Emma, what's wrong?" I asked, setting down my teacup with hands that had suddenly started trembling. "Did something happen at school?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, something happened, all right. I found out the truth about what you've been doing. About what you really are." The words hit me like ice water. "What are you talking about?" Emma threw the stack of papers onto my kitchen island with enough force to scatter them across the marble surface. I could see they were bank statements, credit card bills, and what looked like financial records, but I couldn't understand why she had them, or what they could possibly have to do with whatever had made her so angry. "I'm talking about the fact that you've been lying to me my entire life," she said, her voice rising. "I'm talking about the fact that you're not the selfless, struggling single mother you pretended to be. I'm talking about the fact that you've been manipulating me with fake poverty while sitting on a fortune." My heart stopped. Literally stopped for what felt like a full minute while my brain tried to process what she was saying. "Emma, I don't understand. What fortune? What manipulation? Don't you dare lie to me anymore," she snapped, grabbing one of the bank statements and waving it in my face. "I know about grandmother's trust fund. I know about the inheritance. I know about the investments. I know that you've had access to over $2 million my entire life, and you made me feel guilty for every penny you spent on me." The room started spinning. Emma had found out about my mother's trust fund, the money I'd inherited when she died 5 years ago, the money I'd kept separate from our daily lives, invested conservatively, and planned to use for Emma's future. The money I'd never told her about because I wanted her to understand the value of hard work and financial responsibility. "Emma, let me explain," I started, but she cut me off with a gesture so dismissive it felt like a slap. "Explain what? How you made me feel guilty for wanting a car? How you made me work 2 jobs in high school because we couldn't afford for me to focus on just academics? How you made me take out student loans when you could have paid for my entire education in cash without even noticing the expense?" Each accusation felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Yes, I'd had the money, but I'd kept it separate for a reason. I'd wanted Emma to learn independence, to understand that everything in life had to be earned. I'd seen too many wealthy families whose children became entitled and directionless because they'd never had to work for anything. "I was trying to teach you responsibility," I said weakly. "I wanted you to understand the value of money, to appreciate what you had." "By lying to me?" Emma's voice was getting louder, and I found myself glancing toward the windows, hoping the neighbors couldn't hear. "By making me think we were barely getting by when you were sitting on millions? Do you have any idea how that feels? Do you know what it's like to find out your entire childhood was a performance?" "It wasn't a performance, Emma. Everything I did was out of love, out of wanting what was best for you." "What was best for me?" She laughed again, that same bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "Mom, I have $30,000 in student loan debt. I've been eating ramen noodles and working at a campus coffee shop for beer money, while you've been playing poor single mother with a $2 million safety net. How is any of that what was best for me?" I tried to reach for her, to touch her arm, to somehow bridge the gap that was opening between us like a chasm, but she jerked away from me like my touch was poison. "Don't," she said coldly.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"Don't touch me. Don't try to comfort me. You lost that right when you decided to base our entire relationship on a lie. Emma, please, let me explain my reasoning. Let me tell you why I made these choices." "Your reasoning?" Her voice was getting shrill now, and I could see tears of rage building in her eyes. "Your reasoning? was to control me, to keep me dependent on you, and grateful for every scrap you threw my way. You didn't want me to know about the money because you were afraid I'd realize I didn't need you. The accusation was so unfair, so wrong, that it took my breath away. That's not true. Emma, everything I've done has been about preparing you for independence. I wanted you to be strong, to be capable of taking care of yourself. By lying to me about our financial situation? By making me believe we were struggling when we weren't? Mom, do you realize how many opportunities I missed because I thought we couldn't afford them? Do you know how many times I didn't even ask for things because I didn't want to be a burden? She was crying now, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. I turned down a summer abroad program because I thought the cost would hurt you financially. I chose Northwestern over Columbia because the scholarship package was better, even though Columbia was my dream school. I've been planning my entire career around making enough money to take care of you when you get older, and it turns out you don't need taking care of at all. Each revelation felt like another weight added to my chest. I hadn't known about the summer program, hadn't realized she'd chosen Northwestern for financial reasons. I'd thought she'd picked it because she genuinely preferred it. The idea that she'd been making sacrifices I'd never asked for, limiting her dreams because of information I'd withheld, made me feel sick. Emma, I never wanted you to sacrifice your dreams. If you'd told me about Columbia, if you'd asked about the summer program, I shouldn't have had to ask, she exploded. You should have been honest with me about our real situation. I'm 24 years old, Mom. I'm not a child who needs to be protected from financial realities. But you treated me like I was too stupid or too irresponsible to handle the truth about our family's resources. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but her expression remained hard. And the worst part is that I've been bragging about you. I've been telling all my friends about my amazing mother, who sacrificed everything for me, who worked herself to the bone to give me opportunities. I've been holding you up as this example of maternal devotion, and it turns out you were just playing a role. I wasn't playing a role, I said desperately. Emma, I love you more than anything in this world. Everything I did was motivated by that love, even if my methods were wrong. Your methods weren't wrong, Mom. They were manipulative. There's a difference. She started gathering up the financial papers, her movements sharp and angry. I came home to confront you about this, to give you a chance to explain yourself. But honestly, I don't think there's any explanation that could make this okay. Where did you even get those documents? I asked, still trying to understand how this conversation had started. Jessica's mom works at First National Bank, Emma said, referring to her best friend from high school. She mentioned seeing your name on some high-value accounts, and Jessica told me. So I did some digging. It's amazing what you can find out when you know where to look and what questions to ask. The betrayal felt complete now. Not only had Emma discovered my financial secret, but she'd been investigating me, researching my private affairs like I was some kind of criminal. The daughter I'd raised to trust me had been treating me like a suspect. I can't believe you investigated me, I said quietly. I can't believe you went behind my back instead of just asking me directly. Like you went behind my back for 24 years? She shot back. Like you made unilateral decisions about my life without including me in the conversation? At least my investigation was motivated by a desire for truth. Your secrecy was motivated by a desire for control. She shouldered her purse and headed toward the front door, and panic rose in my throat. Emma, wait. Don't leave like this. We can work through this. We can figure out how to move forward. She stopped at the door and turned back to look at me, and the expression on her face was one I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and utterly without affection. Move forward? She said. Mom, you don't understand. This isn't a fight we're going to have and then make up from. This changes everything. This makes me question every memory I have of our relationship, every moment of gratitude I ever felt toward you, every sacrifice I thought you made for me. Emma, please. I'm going back to school, she said, cutting me off, and I'm going to finish my senior year and graduate and start my life. And I'm going to do it without any help from you, financial or otherwise. I don't want your money. and I don't want your guidance, and I honestly don't know if I want a relationship with you at all." "You don't mean that," I whispered. "I mean every word of it." She opened the front door, and the cool morning air rushed into my warm kitchen. "You want to know the really sad part, Mom? If you'd just been honest with me from the beginning, I would have respected your decision to make me work for things. I would have understood that you wanted me to be independent and responsible. But you couldn't trust me with the truth, and now I can't trust you with anything." She walked out of my house and out of my life, leaving me standing in my kitchen, surrounded by the scattered evidence of my financial deception and the shattered remains of the relationship I'd thought was the most important thing in my world. I spent the rest of that morning in a state of shock, replaying every word of our conversation and trying to understand how my good intentions had been so thoroughly misinterpreted. Yes, I'd kept the inheritance secret, but I'd had good reasons. I'd seen what happened to children who grew up knowing they had unlimited access to money. They became entitled, lazy, unable to appreciate the value of hard work or the satisfaction of earning their own way in the world. My own childhood had been a case study in the dangers of inherited wealth. My mother, Margaret Sterling, had been born into money and had never worked a day in her life. She'd married my father for his family's connections rather than love, and their marriage had been a cold, formal arrangement that prioritized social status over emotional connection. I'd grown up in a house full of expensive things but empty of warmth, where conversations were about proper behavior and social obligations rather than feelings or dreams. When I'd gotten pregnant with Emma at 29, after a brief relationship with an artist who'd seemed exciting but turned out to be irresponsible, my mother had been horrified. Not because I was unmarried, but because I'd chosen to keep the baby and raise her on my own, rather than giving her up for adoption and preserving the family reputation. My mother had cut off my access to the family money and told me that if I wanted to make foolish choices, I could live with the consequences. So I had. I'd worked my way through the rest of my pregnancy, saved every penny, and built a life for Emma and myself that was based on our own efforts rather than inherited privilege. When Emma's father had left us, I'd doubled down on that philosophy, determined to prove that we could thrive without depending on anyone else's money or support. My mother and I had reconciled somewhat when Emma was in high school, bonding over our shared love for my daughter and my mother's grudging respect for what I'd accomplished as a single parent. When she'd died 5 years ago, she'd left me everything. The house in Connecticut, the investment portfolio, the trust funds she'd inherited from her own parents. "She's young," Patricia said firmly. "Young people see everything in black and white. They don't understand the complexities of parenting, the impossible choices we have to make. Give her time." But even as Patricia was reassuring me, I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't the kind of problem that time would fix. Emma's anger hadn't been the hot, impulsive fury of youth. It had been cold, calculated, and final. She'd looked at me like she was reassessing everything she'd ever believed about our relationship, and she hadn't liked what she'd found. The rest of that week passed in a blur of unanswered phone calls and ignored text messages. I tried reaching Emma every day, leaving voicemails that started apologetic and became increasingly desperate. I sent her long emails explaining my reasoning, trying to help her understand that everything I'd done had been motivated by love. I even called Northwestern's main number and asked to be transferred to her dorm, but her roommate told me that Emma had asked her to say she wasn't available. By Friday, I was starting to panic. Emma had never gone more than a few days without talking to me, even during her most rebellious teenage phases. The silence felt ominous, like the quiet before a storm I couldn't see coming. That's when I got the call from my sister Rebecca, who lived in Chicago, about an hour from Emma's campus. "Victoria," Rebecca said without preamble, "I need to talk to you about Emma." My heart started racing. "Is she okay? Is she hurt?" "She's fine physically," Rebecca said carefully. "But she called me yesterday, and we had a long conversation about your financial situation." I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar wave of shame wash over me. "What did she tell you?" "She told me about the inheritance, about the fact that you've been hiding it from her." "Victoria, why didn't you tell me you'd inherited Mom's money?" "I'm your sister. I should have known." "Because I knew you'd try to talk me out of keeping it secret," I admitted. "Because I knew you'd think I was being foolish." "I do think you're being foolish," Rebecca said bluntly, But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because Emma asked me to help her with something, and I think you need to know about it. What kind of help? Rebecca sighed. She wants me to help her change her last name legally. She wants to become Emma Sterling Hayes, using her father's surname along with her middle name. She says she doesn't want to carry your name anymore because she feels like she doesn't know who you really are. The words hit me like a physical blow. Emma wanted to change her name, to distance herself from me so completely that she'd even give up the surname that connected us. The surname I'd kept after her father left because I'd wanted her to know she belonged to someone, even if that someone was just me. Rebecca, she can't be serious about this. She seemed very serious to me, Rebecca said gently. Victoria, I think you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Emma isn't going to forgive you easily, if at all. She feels like you've betrayed her trust in a fundamental way, and that's not something people get over quickly. After I hung up with Rebecca, I sat in my living room surrounded by all the photographs and mementos of Emma's childhood, trying to figure out how I'd gone from being her devoted mother to being someone she wanted to erase from her very identity. The girl who'd once told me I was her best friend now wanted to change her name to avoid being associated with me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If Emma wanted to reject me, if she wanted to cut me out of her life and pretend that everything I'd done for her meant nothing, then I was going to stop pretending that I owed her anything. If she thought I was manipulative and controlling, then maybe it was time for her to see what real manipulation looked like. I spent the weekend researching the financial aid policies at Northwestern, learning about student loan procedures, and making some very interesting discoveries about Emma's assumptions regarding her independence. It turned out that my brilliant, self-sufficient daughter wasn't quite as independent as she thought she was. The first thing I learned was that all of Emma's financial aid, including her student loans, had been calculated based on my income and assets as reported on our FAFSA forms. The same FAFSA forms where I'd been very careful to report only my salary from the accounting firm, not the inheritance or the investment income it had been generating. In other words, Emma's independent financial aid had been based on fraudulent information. The second thing I learned was that as Emma's parent, I had certain legal rights regarding her financial accounts and her student status that she probably wasn't aware of. Since she was still listed as my dependent on my tax returns, and since I'd been the one to co-sign her student loans, I had more control over her financial situation than she realized. The third thing I learned was that Emma's spring tuition payment was due in exactly 2 weeks, and according to the university's payment portal, which I still had access to as her emergency contact, she hadn't paid it yet. She was probably planning to use her financial aid refund to cover it, the same financial aid that had been calculated based on information that was no longer accurate. By Sunday evening, I had a plan. If Emma wanted to learn about independence, if she wanted to cut me out of her life and handle everything on her own, then I was going to give her exactly what she'd asked for. No more safety nets, no more financial cushions, no more mother's love protecting her from the consequences of her choices. It was time for Emma to discover what real independence looked like. On Monday morning, I drove to my lawyer's office and made some changes to my will, removing Emma as my beneficiary and instead leaving everything to various charities. I also established a new trust fund, but not for Emma's benefit. This trust would be used to ensure that the truth about our family's financial situation became public knowledge, in case Emma ever tried to claim that she'd been deprived of resources she was entitled to. Tuesday, I called Northwestern's financial aid office and informed them that there had been errors in our FAFSA submissions, and that my actual income was significantly higher than what had been reported. I provided them with documentation of the inheritance and requested that Emma's financial aid package be recalculated based on accurate information. Wednesday, I contacted the student loan companies and, as Emma's co-signer, requested detailed information about her current balances and payment schedules. I learned that she owed more than she'd told me, and that several of her loans were already in deferment status, meaning she'd been struggling financially for longer than I'd realized. Thursday, I called my bank and froze the credit card that was connected to my account, but which Emma still had access to for emergencies. I also removed her as an authorized user on all of my other accounts, and changed my emergency contact information at all of the financial institutions where she might have been able to access information about my accounts. Friday, I received a call from Northwestern's financial aid office, confirming that Emma's aid package would need to be completely recalculated. and that she would likely be required to repay a significant portion of the grants she'd already received, since they'd been awarded based on incorrect financial information. The following Monday, I got the call I'd been expecting. "Mom?" Emma's voice was small and shaky, so different from the confident, angry young woman who'd confronted me in my kitchen 2 weeks earlier. "I need to talk to you. There's been some kind of mistake with my financial aid." "What kind of mistake?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "They're saying that our FAFSA information was wrong, that your income is higher than what we reported. They want me to pay back thousands of dollars in grants, and they're saying my student loans might be affected too." "Mom, I don't understand what's happening." "It's not a mistake, Emma," I said calmly. "I corrected the errors in our financial aid applications. I reported the inheritance that you seem to think I should have been more open about." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Emma spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "You did this on purpose." "I did what you asked me to do," I said. "You wanted honesty about our financial situation. You wanted independence from me. I'm giving you both of those things." "Mom, I can't afford to pay back those grants. And if my student loans get called in early, I'll have to drop out of school. I only have 2 months left until graduation." "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said, echoing the dismissive tone she'd used with me during our last conversation. "You're brilliant and independent, remember? You don't need me or my money." "This is different, and you know it," Emma said, and I could hear that she was crying now. "This isn't about learning independence. This is about punishing me for being angry with you." "This is about consequences," I corrected her. "You made it very clear that you didn't want anything to do with me or my resources. I'm simply respecting your wishes." "I never said I didn't want your help with school," Emma protested. "I said I didn't want a relationship with you right now. Those are 2 different things." "Not to me, they're not," I said. "Emma, you can't pick and choose which parts of me you want in your life. You can't reject me as your mother, but still expect me to function as your personal bank account." She was crying harder now, and for a moment my resolve wavered. This was my daughter, my baby, the person I'd loved more than my own life for 24 years. Hearing her cry had always been my greatest weakness, the thing that could make me abandon any principle or boundary in favor of comforting her. But then I remembered the look on her face when she'd called me manipulative and controlling. A week after our phone conversation, I received a registered letter from Emma. Inside was a formal apology, typed and signed, along with a detailed plan for how she intended to repair our relationship. She promised to attend family therapy, to publicly acknowledge that she'd been wrong about my motivations, and to change her name back to Emma Sterling if I would just help her through her current financial crisis. I read the letter twice, then put it through my paper shredder without responding. The next letter came from Northwestern's Dean of Students, informing me that Emma had reached out to them for emergency financial assistance. They were writing to confirm the family financial situation and to ask whether I would be willing to provide a letter of support for Emma's application for emergency grants. I wrote back explaining that Emma had made it clear she wanted to be independent from her family, and that I was respecting her wishes by not interfering in her financial affairs. The third letter came from a lawyer representing Emma, threatening legal action if I didn't restore her access to financial resources that she claimed were rightfully hers as my daughter. The letter cited various laws about parental responsibility and suggested that my actions constituted financial abuse. I forwarded that letter to my own lawyer, along with copies of all the emails and voicemails Emma had sent me over the past 2 weeks. My lawyer's response was swift and definitive. Emma had no legal right to my financial support, especially given that she was an adult who had explicitly rejected our relationship. If anything, her threats of legal action strengthened my position by demonstrating that she viewed our relationship as purely transactional. By the end of March, Emma's spring semester was in jeopardy. She'd managed to scrape together enough money to avoid being kicked out of school immediately, but she was going to have to take out additional loans at much higher interest rates to finish her degree. Her summer internship at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago had been rescinded when they'd learned about her academic status being in question. Her plans to attend graduate school in the fall were now impossible, since her undergraduate transcripts would show financial irregularities that would make her ineligible for most competitive programs. Everything Emma had worked for over the past 4 years was falling apart. And for the first time in her life, I wasn't rushing in to save her from the consequences of her choices. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like justice was being served. But as I sat in my empty house, surrounded by photographs of the daughter who now refused to speak to me, I mostly felt hollow. Emma was learning about independence, but I was learning about the price of love without trust, about the difference between being respected and being feared. I had spent 24 years teaching Emma that I would always be there to catch her when she fell. Now I was teaching her what it felt like to fall without a safety net. The question was whether either of us would survive the lesson. 3 weeks after I'd cut off Emma's financial support, I was working late at Martinez & Associates when my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank's mobile app. Someone had attempted to access one of my investment accounts using what appeared to be legitimate credentials, but the security system had flagged it as suspicious activity because the access was coming from an IP address in Illinois. Emma was trying to hack into my financial accounts. I stared at the notification for a full minute, feeling a mixture of disbelief and cold fury wash over me. My daughter, the girl I'd raised to be honest and ethical, was attempting to steal from me. Not just steal money, but steal access to information that could potentially allow her to manipulate my finances in ways that could destroy both of our lives. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Margaret Chen, and scheduled an emergency meeting. Margaret had been managing my portfolio since I'd inherited my mother's estate, and she'd been the one person who knew the full extent of my assets from the beginning. She'd also been the one to advise me to keep the inheritance separate from my daily finances, though her reasoning had been about tax efficiency rather than family dynamics. "Victoria," Margaret said when I arrived at her office with printouts of the security alerts, "this is serious. If Emma has somehow obtained your login credentials, she could potentially access not just your investment accounts, but your personal banking, your credit reports, and even your tax records." "How would she have gotten my login information?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. "Does she have access to your home computer, your email accounts, your physical files?" Margaret was pulling up my account information on her computer, checking for any unauthorized transactions. "More importantly, does she know your typical passwords, your security questions, the personal information you use for account recovery?" I thought about all the times Emma had used my laptop for school projects when she was in high school. All the times I'd asked her to help me with online banking when I was struggling with the technology. I thought about how many of my security questions were probably about information she would know. My first pet's name, my mother's maiden name, the street I grew up on. "She knows enough to be dangerous," I admitted. Margaret's expression grew more serious. "We need to change everything. Every password, every security question, every piece of personal information associated with your accounts. And we need to put additional security measures in place to make sure this doesn't happen again." We spent the next 2 hours systematically securing my financial life against my own daughter. New passwords that had nothing to do with our family history. New security questions with answers that Emma couldn't possibly know. 2-factor authentication on every account. Credit monitoring to alert me if anyone tried to open new accounts in my name. "I hate to ask this," Margaret said as we were finishing up, "but is there any chance Emma might have access to your social security number, your mother's maiden name, or other information that could be used for identity theft?" The question made my stomach drop. Of course, Emma had access to all of that information. She'd helped me with insurance paperwork, tax documents, and financial aid forms for years. She probably knew my social security number by heart. "We need to put a fraud alert on your credit reports," Margaret said when she saw my expression. "And you should consider freezing your credit entirely until this situation is resolved." "Margaret," I said quietly, "what kind of legal trouble could Emma get into if she actually manages to access my accounts?" "Bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, potentially computer crimes, depending on how she's trying to access the accounts," Margaret said matter-of-factly. "We're talking about federal charges, Victoria. If your daughter is desperate enough to try this, she's desperate enough to ruin her entire future." That afternoon, I received a call from Rebecca, my sister in Chicago. Her voice was tense and worried in a way I'd never heard before. Victoria, I need to tell you something about Emma, and you're not going to like it. What now? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She came to my house yesterday, asking me to loan her money. Not a small amount, Victoria. She wants $30,000 to cover her tuition debt and her living expenses for the rest of the semester. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't have that kind of money to lend, which is the truth. But, Victoria, she didn't believe me. She started asking questions about our family's financial history, about whether I'd inherited anything when Mom died, about whether you'd given me access to any of the trust funds. I closed my eyes, feeling the situation spiraling further out of control. What kind of questions? She wanted to know if I had power of attorney over any of your accounts. She asked if there was a way for family members to access inheritance money in emergency situations. She was asking questions like she'd been researching legal ways to get access to money that isn't hers. Rebecca, did she threaten you? Did she try to pressure you? Not exactly threaten, but she was very insistent. She kept saying that you were being unreasonable and vindictive, that you were punishing her for expressing her feelings. She said that morally she had a right to access the inheritance, since it was family money that would eventually come to her anyway. Eventually come to her. Emma was operating under the assumption that she was still my heir, that despite our estrangement and her rejection of our relationship, she would still inherit my estate when I died. She was planning for my money like it was already hers. Rebecca, I need to tell you something, I said. Emma's been trying to hack into my financial accounts. I've had to put security freezes on all my credit reports and change every password I have. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. When Rebecca finally spoke, her voice was shocked. Victoria, that's not just desperate behavior, that's criminal behavior. Emma could go to prison for attempted bank fraud. I know, and the worst part is, I don't think she cares. I think she's so convinced that she's entitled to my money that she's willing to break the law to get it. That evening, I sat in my study surrounded by financial documents and legal paperwork, trying to figure out how my relationship with Emma had deteriorated so completely. 6 months ago, she'd been my pride and joy, my greatest accomplishment, the person I loved most in the world. Now she was attempting to commit federal crimes against me, recruiting family members to help her access money that wasn't hers, and apparently willing to destroy both of our lives to prove some point about independence and honesty. I thought about calling her, about trying one more time to have a rational conversation about our situation. But every time I reached for the phone, I remembered the security alerts, the attempted account breaches, the questions she'd been asking Rebecca about legal ways to access my money. Emma wasn't interested in reconciliation. She was interested in winning, in getting what she felt she deserved regardless of the cost to our relationship or her own integrity. The next morning brought a new development that made everything infinitely worse. I received a call from Northwestern's Dean of Students, Dr. Sarah Williams, requesting a meeting to discuss Emma's academic standing and financial situation. Mrs. Sterling, Dr. Williams said when I arrived at her office, I'm calling because Emma has made some very serious accusations against you that require investigation. What kind of accusations? She's filed a formal complaint alleging financial abuse and educational sabotage. She claims that you've been deliberately interfering with her ability to complete her education as a form of retaliation for personal family conflicts. I stared at Dr. Williams, trying to process what she was telling me. Emma filed a complaint against me with the university? She's requesting that the university intervene on her behalf to ensure she can complete her degree. She's also asking us to contact social services and potentially law enforcement about what she describes as a pattern of financial manipulation and control. Financial manipulation and control. Emma was accusing me of the exact same thing she'd accused me of when this whole situation started, except now she was making those accusations to people who had the power to investigate them officially. Dr. Williams, I said carefully, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of our family situation. I hope so, Dr. Williams said, pulling out a thick file. Because Emma has provided us with quite a bit of documentation to support her claims. Bank statements showing that you have significant assets that weren't reported on financial aid forms. Email correspondence between you and our financial aid office requesting that her aid package be recalculated. Documentation of credit accounts and financial resources being cut off immediately after she expressed dissatisfaction with your relationship. She slid a document across her desk toward me. This is a timeline Emma created of what she describes as escalating financial abuse. She claims that you've been using money as a tool to control her behavior and punish her for asserting her independence. I looked down at the timeline, and my blood ran cold. Emma had documented everything. Every phone call I'd made to the financial aid office. Every account I'd closed or restricted. Every payment I'd stopped or delayed. But she'd presented it all in a way that made me look like a vindictive abuser, rather than a parent setting boundaries with an adult child who'd rejected our relationship. Dr. Williams, I need you to understand that Emma is an adult who made very clear statements about not wanting a relationship with me. I didn't cut off her financial support to punish her. I did it because she explicitly told me she didn't want anything to do with me or my resources. That's not how she describes the situation, Dr. Williams said. According to Emma, she expressed anger about feeling deceived by your family's financial situation, and you responded by systematically destroying her ability to support herself financially. She told me she didn't want my money, I said, hearing the defensiveness in my own voice. She said she wanted to be independent. I was giving her what she asked for. Mrs. Sterling, Emma is 8 weeks away from graduating with a degree she's worked 4 years to earn. Regardless of what personal conflicts you're having with your daughter, don't you think cutting off her educational funding at such a critical time is disproportionate to whatever offense she committed? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that from the outside, my actions probably did look cruel and vindictive. No one else had heard the contempt in Emma's voice when she'd called me manipulative and controlling. No one else had seen the look on her face when she'd told me our entire relationship had been a performance. No one else knew about her attempts to hack into my financial accounts or her efforts to recruit other family members to help her access money that wasn't hers. Emma didn't just express anger, I said quietly. She told me she was ashamed of me, that she didn't trust me, that she didn't know if she wanted a relationship with me at all. She investigated my private financial affairs like I was a criminal. She threatened to change her name to distance herself from me. Those aren't just expressions of anger. Those are statements of complete rejection. Dr. Williams made notes as I spoke, but her expression remained skeptical. And your response to feeling rejected was to ensure that your daughter couldn't complete her education? My response was to stop pretending that I owed her anything after she made it clear that she viewed our relationship as purely transactional, I said, my voice getting harder. Emma wants the benefits of being my daughter without any of the responsibilities or respect that come with family relationships. Mrs. Sterling, I understand that this is a difficult family situation, but Emma is requesting that the university help her access emergency funds to complete her degree. She's also asking us to connect her with legal resources and social services that might be able to intervene in what she describes as an abusive situation. Abusive? The word came out louder than I'd intended. Dr. Williams, Emma is 24 years old. She's an adult who made adult choices about rejecting her family. I'm not obligated to finance the education of someone who treats me with contempt and disrespect. Perhaps not legally obligated, Dr. Williams said carefully, but morally. Don't you think there's a difference between setting boundaries and deliberately sabotaging your child's future? I left Northwestern feeling like I'd been put on trial for the crime of refusing to be taken advantage of by my own daughter. Emma had managed to present herself as the victim of financial abuse, rather than an adult who was facing the consequences of her own choices. She'd turned my attempts to teach her about independence into evidence of my cruelty, and she'd enlisted the university administration to fight her battles for her. But I wasn't finished fighting back. That afternoon, I called my lawyer, David Martinez, and scheduled an emergency consultation. I brought copies of all the documentation Emma had apparently provided to Northwestern, along with the security alerts from my bank and the notes from my conversation with Rebecca. David, I said, spreading the papers across his conference table, I need to know what legal protections I have if my adult daughter is going to start making formal accusations of financial abuse. David reviewed the documents carefully, making notes and asking clarifying questions about the timeline of events. After an hour, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me seriously. Victoria, Emma is playing a dangerous game. If she continues to make formal accusations of abuse and involve institutions like the university and potentially social services, She's opening herself up to serious legal consequences if those accusations prove to be false. What kind of consequences? Filing false reports, defamation, potentially extortion if she's demanding money in exchange for not pursuing these complaints. And if she actually manages to access your financial accounts, we're talking about felony charges. David pulled out a legal pad and started making a list. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to document everything. Every interaction you've had with Emma, every phone call, every email, every attempt she's made to access your accounts. Second, we're going to send a formal cease and desist letter demanding that she stop making false accusations and attempting to access your financial information. Third, we're going to prepare a comprehensive response to any investigation that might result from her complaints. What kind of response? A response that shows Emma is an adult who rejected her family relationship and is now attempting to use legal and institutional pressure to force you to provide financial support you're not obligated to give. A response that demonstrates her accusations of abuse are actually descriptions of natural consequences for her own choices. David leaned forward, his expression serious. But Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there any part of Emma's story that could be interpreted as you using financial control to manipulate her behavior? I thought about the question carefully. Had I used money to control Emma? Or had I simply stopped providing financial support to someone who'd rejected our relationship? I kept the inheritance secret because I wanted Emma to learn the value of hard work and financial responsibility, I said slowly. When she found out about it and accused me of being manipulative and controlling, I stopped providing her with financial support because I felt like she'd made it clear she didn't want anything to do with me. I wasn't trying to control her behavior. I was trying to protect myself from being used by someone who'd already rejected me. That's a distinction that could be important if this goes to court, David said. The key is going to be demonstrating that your actions were reasonable responses to Emma's behavior, not attempts to coerce her into doing what you wanted. He started outlining a legal strategy that would protect me from Emma's accusations, while also ensuring that any criminal behavior on her part would be properly documented and prosecuted. But as he talked about depositions and investigations and potential court proceedings, I felt a deep sadness settling over me. This was what my relationship with Emma had become: legal strategies, and documentation and protection from false accusations. The daughter I'd raised with love and sacrifice had become someone I needed a lawyer to defend me against. 2 days later, Emma escalated the situation beyond anything I could have imagined. I was at work when I received a call from Patricia, my best friend, who sounded absolutely frantic. "Victoria, you need to get home right now," she said without preamble. "There's a social worker at your house asking questions about Emma, and there are reporters outside." "Reporters? What are you talking about?" Emma gave an interview to the Chicago Tribune about financial abuse in families. She didn't use your name, but she described your situation in enough detail that people in town are putting it together. "Victoria, she's made this public." I left work immediately and drove home to find exactly what Patricia had described. A social worker from the Department of Children and Family Services was sitting in my driveway, waiting to interview me about allegations of financial abuse. 2 reporters and a camera crew were stationed across the street, apparently hoping to get a statement from me about my daughter's accusations. The social worker, a tired-looking woman in her 40s named Janet Morrison, was apologetic but thorough in her questioning. "Mrs. Sterling, I know this is an unusual situation since Emma is an adult, but when allegations of ongoing financial abuse are made public, we're required to investigate," she explained as we sat in my living room. "Emma has described a pattern of behavior that suggests you've been using financial resources to control and manipulate her decisions throughout her life. What specific allegations has she made?" Janet consulted her notes. "She claims that you deliberately hid family wealth to make her feel guilty about financial requests. She says you forced her to take out student loans when you could have afforded to pay for her education. She alleges that when she confronted you about these deceptions, you retaliated by cutting off all financial support and sabotaging her ability to complete her education." Each allegation was technically true, but completely stripped of context. Yes, I'd hidden the inheritance, but I'd done it to teach Emma values, not to make her feel guilty. Yes, I could have paid for her education, but I'd wanted her to have some investment in her own success. Yes, I'd cut off financial support after she confronted me, but only after she'd made it clear she didn't want a relationship with me. Mrs. Sterling, Janet continued, Emma has also provided documentation suggesting that you've been monitoring her financial activities and attempting to control her access to resources even after she became an adult. I haven't been monitoring her activities, I said carefully. I stopped providing financial support, which is my right as the owner of those resources. But you did contact her university to change the financial aid information that affected her ability to pay for school. I corrected false information that had been submitted on federal financial aid forms, I said. Information that, if left uncorrected, could have resulted in both of us facing federal charges for financial aid fraud. Janet made notes as I spoke, but I could tell she was having trouble understanding the nuances of the situation. From her perspective, I probably looked like a wealthy woman who was punishing her daughter for expressing anger by destroying her educational opportunities. The interview lasted 2 hours and covered everything from Emma's childhood to our recent estrangement. Janet was professional and fair, but I could sense that she was troubled by what she perceived as a disproportionate response to a family disagreement. Mrs. Sterling, I have to ask, Janet said as we were finishing up, is there any way you and Emma could work together to resolve this situation? She's very close to graduating, and it seems like the financial issues could be resolved relatively easily if both parties were willing to compromise. Emma would have to acknowledge that her accusations against me are false, I said. She would have to apologize for investigating my private affairs and making public statements that damage my reputation. And she would have to demonstrate that she's interested in having a respectful relationship with me, not just accessing my financial resources. And if she did those things? I thought about it carefully. I don't know, I admitted. Janet, Emma didn't just express anger or disappointment. She told me that our entire relationship had been a lie, that she was ashamed of me, that she didn't want to be associated with my name. Those aren't things you can just take back with an apology. After Janet left, I sat in my living room watching the news crew pack up their equipment across the street. Emma had succeeded in making our private family conflict into a public spectacle, and she'd managed to position herself as the victim of an abusive parent, rather than an adult who was facing consequences for her own choices. That evening, I watched the local news coverage of our story. The reporter had done a segment on financial abuse in families, using Emma's interview as an example of how parents can use money to control their adult children. They didn't use our names, but they included enough details that anyone who knew us would immediately recognize the situation. Emma appeared on camera in silhouette, her voice disguised, describing me as a, quote, manipulative parent who used financial deception to control every aspect of my life. She talked about feeling trapped and helpless when she discovered the inheritance, and about being systematically punished for trying to assert her independence. No young person should have to choose between their education and their principles, Emma said in the interview. But that's the choice my mother gave me when I tried to hold her accountable for years of financial deception. The story presented me as a cautionary tale about the dangers of wealthy parents who use money as a weapon against their children. There was no mention of Emma's rejection of our relationship, her attempts to access my financial accounts, or her threats to change her name. I was simply the bad parent who had hidden money and then vindictively destroyed my daughter's future when she called me out for it. I turned off the television and sat in the dark, feeling like I was living in some alternate reality where everything I'd done out of love had been twisted into evidence of cruelty and manipulation. Emma had not only rejected me as her mother, but she'd also successfully convinced the world that I was an abuser who deserved to be rejected. The next morning brought the consequences of Emma's media strategy. I arrived at work to find my boss, Carlos Martinez, waiting for me in his office with a serious expression on his face. Victoria, he said, closing the door behind me, we need to talk about the news coverage from last night. Carlos, I can explain the situation. The story doesn't represent what actually happened between Emma and me. I'm sure it doesn't, he said kindly. But Victoria, we're a family law firm. Our entire reputation is based on trust and ethical behavior. Having an employee who's been publicly accused of financial abuse, even in a personal family matter, creates problems for our business. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. Are you firing me? I'm putting you on administrative leave pending the outcome of the social services investigation, Carlos said. If you're cleared of any wrongdoing, you can come back to work. But until then, I can't have you representing our firm or having access to client financial information. Carlos, please. This job is all I have left. Emma has already destroyed my relationship with her, and now she's going to destroy my career too. I'm sorry, Victoria, he said genuinely. But I have to protect the firm and our other employees. If clients start questioning whether we can be trusted with their financial information because one of our bookkeepers has been accused of financial abuse, it could destroy everything we've built. I cleaned out my desk that morning while my colleagues watched with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Some of them had seen the news coverage and were probably wondering if there was truth to Emma's accusations. Others were probably just grateful it wasn't happening to them. By noon, I was unemployed, under investigation by social services, and facing a potential defamation lawsuit if I tried to publicly defend myself against Emma's accusations. My daughter had successfully destroyed my reputation, my career, and my financial security in the span of a week. But Emma had made one critical miscalculation in her campaign to portray herself as the victim of financial abuse. She'd assumed that I would continue to be the passive, accommodating mother who absorbed her attacks without fighting back. She'd assumed that I would be too ashamed or too concerned about our relationship to defend myself aggressively. She was about to learn how wrong she was. That afternoon, I called David Martinez and told him I was ready to stop playing defense and start playing offense. I want to file a defamation lawsuit against Emma, I said. I want to press charges for attempted computer fraud. I want to document every false statement she's made and every illegal action she's taken, and I want to make sure there are consequences for what she's done to my life. Victoria, are you sure about this? David asked. Once we go down this path, there's no going back. You'll be taking legal action against your own daughter. Emma stopped being my daughter the moment she decided to destroy my life rather than take responsibility for her own choices, I said. Now she's just someone who's committed crimes against me and needs to face the consequences. David was quiet for a moment. All right, he said finally. Let's make sure Emma understands exactly what real consequences look like. The war between Emma and me was about to become a legal battle, and I was finally ready to fight back with everything I had. 3 days after I'd been placed on administrative leave, Emma made her biggest mistake yet. She appeared on a morning talk show in Chicago to discuss ALT, and this time she used our real names. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when Patricia called me, her voice high with panic. Victoria, turn on Channel 7 right now. Emma is on television talking about you by name. I grabbed the remote with shaking hands and turned to the local morning show just in time to see my daughter sitting across from the host, looking poised and sympathetic as she described me as a financially abusive parent who systematically deceived and manipulated her daughter for decades. My mother, Victoria Sterling, made me believe we were struggling financially while sitting on a multi-million-dollar inheritance, Emma was saying to the camera. When I confronted her about this deception, she retaliated by destroying my ability to complete my education. She contacted my university, my loan companies, and my financial aid office to ensure that I would face financial ruin, rather than hold her accountable for her lies. The host, a middle-aged woman with carefully styled blonde hair, nodded sympathetically. Emma, how has this affected your ability to trust other people in your life? It's destroyed my ability to trust anyone completely, Emma said, and I could see tears building in her eyes. When the person who's supposed to love you unconditionally uses money as a weapon against you, it makes you question everything you thought you knew about love and family. And what would you say to other young people who might be facing similar situations with their parents? I would say that financial abuse is real, and it's just as damaging as any other kind of abuse, Emma said, looking directly into the camera. No parent has the right to control their adult child's life through money, and no young person should have to choose between their principles and their financial security. I turned off the television and immediately called David Martinez. David, Emma just appeared on television and used my full name while making false accusations against me, I said without preamble. How quickly can we file a defamation lawsuit? Very quickly, David said grimly. Victoria, By using your real name on television, Emma just committed actionable defamation. We can prove that her statements were false, that they were broadcast to a large audience, and that they've caused measurable damage to your reputation and career. What kind of damages can we seek? Loss of income from your job, damage to your professional reputation, emotional distress, and potentially punitive damages if we can prove she acted with malice, David said. Victoria, this television appearance might have just cost Emma everything. That afternoon, David filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Emma, seeking $2 million in damages for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of privacy. The lawsuit included transcripts of her television appearances, documentation of the job I'd lost, and evidence that her accusations had been deliberately false and malicious. We also filed criminal complaints for attempted computer fraud and identity theft. Based on the security alerts from my bank and the documentation of her attempts to access my financial accounts. The legal papers were served to Emma at her dorm room that evening by a process server who found her surrounded by friends, probably celebrating her television appearance. According to the process server's report, Emma had gone pale when she realized what the documents were, and several of her friends had started crying when they understood that she was being sued and potentially facing criminal charges. The next morning, I received a call from Rebecca, my sister, who sounded absolutely devastated. "Victoria, what have you done?" she demanded. "Emma called me sobbing last night. She says you're suing her for $2 million and trying to have her arrested. I'm holding her accountable for defaming me on television and attempting to commit fraud against my financial accounts," I said calmly. "Emma made this a legal matter when she decided to make false public accusations against me." "She's your daughter," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "How can you take legal action against your own child?" "She stopped being my daughter when she decided to destroy my life rather than take responsibility for her own choices," I said. "Rebecca, Emma has cost me my job, my reputation, and my peace of mind. She's committed crimes against me and made false public statements that have damaged me professionally and personally. Those actions have consequences." "But $2 million? Criminal charges? Victoria, you could ruin her entire future over what amounts to a family disagreement. Emma ruined her own future when she decided to escalate our private conflict into a public campaign of defamation and fraud," I said. "I didn't make her go on television. I didn't make her use my real name. I didn't make her attempt to hack into my bank accounts. Those were her choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "Victoria, I don't know who you've become, but you're not the sister I grew up with. The Victoria I knew would never destroy her own daughter over money. The Victoria you knew also would never have had her own daughter attempt to commit federal crimes against her," I said. "Emma changed the rules of our relationship, and I'm simply playing by the new rules she established." I hung up and immediately blocked Rebecca's number. I was done with family members who wanted to enable Emma's behavior and act like I was the villain for defending myself against her attacks. 2 hours later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, please," she said, and I could hear that she'd been crying. "Please don't do this. Please don't destroy my life over one stupid television appearance." "One stupid television appearance?" I repeated. "Emma, you went on television and told the world that I was an abusive parent. You used my real name and made statements that cost me my job and my reputation. That wasn't a mistake. That was a deliberate attack." "I didn't think about the consequences," Emma sobbed. "I was angry, and I wanted people to understand what you'd done to me. I didn't realize it would hurt you professionally." "You didn't think about the consequences," I said, feeling a cold fury building in my chest. "Emma, that's been your problem from the beginning. You make dramatic gestures and angry accusations without thinking about how they might affect other people. Well, congratulations. Now you get to experience what it's like when your actions have real consequences that you can't take back." "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I'll go back on television and retract everything I said. I'll tell them I was wrong about you. Just please don't sue me. Please don't try to have me arrested." "It's too late for apologies," I said. "Emma, you had multiple opportunities to de-escalate this situation. You could have had a private conversation with me about the inheritance. You could have accepted my explanation for why I made the choices I made. You could have disagreed with me without rejecting our entire relationship. Instead, you chose to investigate me like a criminal, threaten me with legal action, attempt to commit fraud against my accounts, and defame me on public television. Those choices have consequences that I can't undo even if I wanted to. But I'm your daughter, Emma whispered. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore? You gave up the right to call yourself my daughter when you told me you were ashamed of me and didn't want to carry my name, I said. You can't reject someone when it's convenient for you and then claim family loyalty when you need protection from the consequences of that rejection. Mom, please. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll pay you back for any money you've lost. I'll publicly apologize and acknowledge that I was wrong about everything. Just please don't destroy my entire future over this. Emma, if you wanted to preserve your future, you shouldn't have committed crimes against me and made false public statements about me, I said. I'm not destroying your future. I'm simply refusing to protect you from the consequences of your own choices. I hung up and turned off my phone, because I knew that if I continued to listen to Emma cry and beg, I might weaken and try to fix everything for her one more time. But I was done being the mother who sacrificed her own well-being to shield Emma from the results of her own behavior. Emma had wanted to learn about independence and consequences. She was about to get the most expensive education of her life. The settlement conference was scheduled for a rainy Thursday morning in April, 6 weeks after I'd filed the lawsuit against Emma. We met in David Martinez's conference room, a sterile space with gray carpeting and fluorescent lighting that seemed appropriate for the death of a relationship that had once been the most important thing in my life. Emma arrived with her court-appointed attorney, a young public defender named James Crawford, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Emma herself was almost unrecognizable. She'd lost weight, her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing clothes I'd never seen before, probably borrowed from friends since her credit cards had been frozen, as part of the asset protection measures we'd put in place. She couldn't meet my eyes when she walked into the room. David had prepared me for this moment, warning me that settlement conferences were designed to encourage emotional reconciliation between parties. But when I looked at Emma, sitting across the table from me, pale and defeated, I felt nothing but a cold satisfaction that she was finally understanding the true cost of her choices. Before we begin discussions, David announced, I want to make it clear that Mrs. Sterling has no obligation to settle this matter. The evidence of defamation is overwhelming, the financial damages are well documented, and the criminal charges for attempted fraud are proceeding independently of this civil action. James Crawford, Emma's attorney, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. Martinez, my client is a 24-year-old college student who made some poor decisions during a family conflict. Surely there's room for resolution here that doesn't involve destroying a young woman's entire future. Your client is a 24-year-old adult who committed multiple felonies and engaged in a public campaign of defamation against her mother, David replied smoothly. Her age doesn't excuse criminal behavior or eliminate the consequences of her choices. The mediator, an older woman named Patricia Henley, tried to steer the conversation toward reconciliation. Mrs. Sterling, Emma, your family. Surely there must be some way to resolve this conflict that preserves your relationship while addressing the legitimate concerns on both sides. There is no relationship to preserve, I said clearly. Emma made that very clear when she told me she was ashamed of me and didn't want to be associated with my name. Emma spoke for the first time since entering the room, her voice barely audible. Mom, I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. You also did things you meant, I replied. You investigated my private financial affairs. You attempted to access my bank accounts illegally. You recruited other family members to help you get money that wasn't yours. You went on television and told the world I was an abusive parent. Those weren't words said in anger. Those were calculated actions designed to hurt me and get what you wanted. I never meant for it to go this far, Emma whispered, tears starting to build in her eyes. I just wanted you to be honest with me about our family's financial situation. I was honest with you, I said. I told you exactly why I'd made the choices I made. But instead of listening or trying to understand my perspective, you decided to punish me for making decisions you didn't agree with. James Crawford attempted to take control of the conversation. Mrs. Sterling, What would it take for you to consider dropping the lawsuit and the criminal charges? David and I had anticipated this question and prepared a response that we knew Emma could never accept. Complete public retraction of all false statements she's made about me, I said, consulting the list David had prepared. A formal apology broadcast on the same television programs where she made her accusations. Repayment of all financial losses I've incurred as a result of her actions, including lost wages and legal fees. A binding agreement that she will never again make public statements about our family or our financial affairs. And a formal acknowledgement that her accusations of financial abuse were false and malicious. Emma's face went white as I read through the list. Mom, I can't afford to pay your legal fees. And if I go on television and admit I lied about everything, I'll be humiliated. Everyone will know I made it all up. You should have thought about that before you made the accusations, I said coldly. Emma, you wanted to make our private family conflict into a public spectacle. Now you get to deal with the public consequences of that choice. But I'll never be able to get a job in my field, Emma protested. If employers Google my name and find out I made false accusations against my own mother, they'll never hire me. That's correct, I agreed. Your reputation will be permanently damaged, just like mine has been. The difference is that your reputation will be damaged by the truth about what you've done, while mine was damaged by lies about what I supposedly did. Patricia Henley tried again to find middle ground. Mrs. Sterling, surely there's some arrangement that would allow Emma to take responsibility for her mistakes without completely destroying her future prospects. Emma destroyed her own future prospects when she decided to escalate a family disagreement into a criminal matter, I said. I'm not responsible for fixing the consequences of her choices. The settlement conference lasted 4 hours, with James Crawford making increasingly desperate offers on Emma's behalf. She would transfer to a less expensive school and use the money saved to pay my damages. She would work for me without pay to make up for the financial losses. She would enter family therapy and undergo counseling to address what he termed her, quote, poor judgment and impulse control issues. I rejected every proposal because none of them addressed the fundamental issue. Emma had committed crimes against me and needed to face criminal consequences, not just civil ones. I wasn't interested in her money, her labor, or her therapy. I was interested in justice. Mrs. Sterling, James Crawford said as the session was winding down, I have to ask you directly. Are you prepared to send your own daughter to prison over this matter? I'm prepared to let Emma face the consequences of her own criminal behavior, I replied. If those consequences include prison time, that's the result of her choices, not mine. Emma finally looked directly at me for the first time that day, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't anger or defiance anymore. It was fear and genuine desperation. Mom, please, she said, her voice breaking. I know I've done terrible things to you. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I'm begging you not to destroy my entire life over this. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll just give me a chance. You had chances, Emma, I said quietly. You had multiple opportunities to de-escalate this situation and choose a different path. But every time I gave you a chance to make better choices, you made worse ones instead. I was scared and desperate, Emma sobbed. I didn't know what to do when I found out about the inheritance. I felt like everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. So you decided to make my life a lie too, I said. You decided that if you were going to suffer, I should suffer too. Well, congratulations, you succeeded. I've lost my job, my reputation, and my relationship with other family members because of your actions. Now it's your turn to understand what real suffering feels like. Emma was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. James Crawford put a protective hand on her arm and looked at me with undisguised disgust. Mrs. Sterling, I've been practicing family law for 15 years, and I've never seen a parent so determined to destroy their own child, he said. Whatever Emma did to you, surely it doesn't warrant ruining her entire future. Mr. Crawford, David interjected smoothly, your client attempted to commit bank fraud against my client and engaged in a systematic campaign of public defamation. These aren't family disagreements. These are serious crimes that would result in prosecution regardless of the family relationship between the parties. Emma isn't a career criminal, James protested. She's a young woman who made some bad choices during an emotionally difficult time. There has to be room for mercy and forgiveness in family relationships. There was room for mercy and forgiveness, I said, standing up to indicate that the session was over. Emma chose not to take advantage of it. Now she gets to experience justice instead. I walked out of that conference room feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I felt like I was in control of the situation, rather than being manipulated and attacked by someone I'd once loved unconditionally. Emma had spent months trying to make me feel guilty for protecting my own financial interests and setting boundaries around my resources. She'd accused me of being manipulative and controlling when I was simply refusing to be taken advantage of. Now she was learning what it felt like to have someone else hold all the power in the relationship, and she was discovering that she didn't like being on the receiving end of consequences she couldn't control or manipulate away. The criminal trial began 6 weeks later, in a courtroom that was packed with reporters and curiosity seekers who'd been following our story since Emma's television appearances. The prosecution's case was straightforward and overwhelming. Emma had attempted to access financial accounts that didn't belong to her using fraudulent methods, and she had made false public statements about me that had caused measurable damage to my reputation and career. Emma's defense team, now led by a more experienced attorney her father had hired, tried to argue that her actions had been motivated by emotional distress rather than criminal intent. They painted a picture of a young woman who'd been traumatized by discovering that her mother had hidden significant family wealth, and who'd made poor decisions while trying to process that emotional blow. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Emma's attorney said during opening statements, "this is not a case about bank fraud or defamation. This is a case about a daughter's heartbreak and a mother's revenge." Emma Sterling Hayes discovered that everything she thought she knew about her family's financial situation was a lie, and she reacted with the poor judgment of youth and emotional pain. Her mother, Victoria Sterling, responded to that emotional reaction with a calculated campaign to destroy her daughter's future. But the prosecution had evidence that Emma's actions had been far more calculated than emotional. They presented testimony from computer forensics experts, showing that Emma had researched methods for accessing other people's financial accounts. They played recordings of Emma's conversations with Rebecca, where she'd asked specific questions about legal ways to access inheritance money. They showed the jury documentation of the systematic approach Emma had taken to discrediting me publicly, including drafts of press releases and media strategy notes they'd found on her laptop. This was not the impulsive behavior of an emotionally distraught young woman, the prosecutor argued. This was a deliberate campaign of fraud and defamation designed to force Victoria Sterling to provide financial support that she was not legally obligated to give. I testified for 3 hours about Emma's behavior, from her initial discovery of the inheritance through her television appearances. The prosecutor walked me through each incident methodically, demonstrating that Emma had escalated the situation at every opportunity rather than trying to find peaceful resolution. "Mrs. Sterling," the prosecutor asked, "at any point during this conflict, did Emma attempt to have a calm, adult conversation about her concerns regarding the inheritance?" "No," I replied. "Every interaction we had after she discovered the money was characterized by demands, accusations, and threats. Emma never once asked me to explain my reasoning or tried to understand why I'd made the choices I'd made." "And how did you respond to her demands and accusations?" "Initially, I tried to explain my reasoning and help her understand that I'd kept the inheritance secret to teach her values and responsibility. When she rejected that explanation and told me she didn't want a relationship with me, I stopped providing financial support. I felt like she'd made it clear that she viewed our relationship as purely transactional." Emma's attorney tried to discredit my testimony during cross-examination, suggesting that I was a controlling parent who'd used money to manipulate my daughter throughout her life. But David had prepared me well for these attacks, and I was able to provide clear, factual responses that demonstrated the difference between setting boundaries and being abusive. "Mrs. Sterling," Emma's attorney asked, "isn't it true that you deliberately kept your daughter in poverty while sitting on millions of dollars?" "No," I replied. "I provided Emma with everything she needed, and most of what she wanted. We lived comfortably within the means of my salary, and Emma never lacked for anything essential. I chose not to tell her about the inheritance because I wanted her to learn the value of hard work and financial responsibility. But you could have paid for her college education outright, and chose not to. How is that not financially abusive?" Because I wanted Emma to have some investment in her own education and future success. Research shows that students who have financial responsibility for their education perform better academically and are more likely to complete their degrees. I was trying to set Emma up for success, not punish her. And when she expressed anger about your deception, you immediately cut off all financial support. Isn't that the behavior of someone who uses money to control other people's actions? No, I said firmly. When Emma told me she didn't want a relationship with me and was ashamed to carry my name, I concluded that she didn't want me in her life. It seemed inappropriate to continue providing financial support to someone who'd rejected our family relationship. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Emma was convicted of attempted bank fraud, identity theft, and criminal defamation. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and restitution payments that would take her decades to complete. As the bailiff led Emma away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one last time. The expression on her face was one of complete disbelief, like she still couldn't quite accept that her actions had led to real consequences that couldn't be negotiated away or fixed with an apology. I felt no satisfaction watching my daughter being taken to prison, but I also felt no guilt or regret. Emma had made her choices, and now she was experiencing the results of those choices. For the first time in our relationship, she was learning that her actions had consequences that couldn't be avoided through manipulation, emotional appeals, or family loyalty. The civil lawsuit was resolved while Emma was serving her prison sentence. Her attorney negotiated a settlement that included a formal retraction of all her public statements about me, a written apology that was published in the same newspapers that had covered her accusations, and a judgment for $2.3 million in damages that would follow her for the rest of her life. I used part of the settlement money to start a foundation that provided financial literacy education to young adults, teaching them about the value of hard work, personal responsibility, and the difference between needs and wants. It seemed like an appropriate way to honor the lessons I had tried to teach Emma, even though she'd rejected them so violently. 18 months later, Emma was released from prison and began serving her probation. I received a letter from her a week after her release, asking if we could meet to discuss the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. The letter was carefully written, obviously reviewed by lawyers, and full of the kind of therapeutic language that suggested she'd spent her prison time in counseling programs designed to help her understand her behavior. I read the letter twice, then put it through my paper shredder without responding. 2 years have passed since Emma's release from prison, and I've built a life for myself that doesn't include her. I work as a consultant for small businesses, helping them manage their finances and avoid the kind of family conflicts that can destroy both personal relationships and professional reputations. I'm dating a kind man named Robert, who owns a bookstore downtown, and who has never asked me for anything more than my company and conversation. I live in the same house where I raised Emma, but I've redecorated it to reflect my new life, rather than my old one. Emma's childhood photographs have been replaced with artwork I've collected during my travels. Her trophies and awards have been donated to local schools. The piano she used to play has been moved to the Foundation's office, where it's used by the young people who participate in our financial literacy programs. I sleep well at night, something I didn't do for months during our conflict. I no longer worry about what Emma might be planning or what accusations she might make next. I've learned to value my own peace of mind more than family relationships that are based on obligation rather than mutual respect and affection. Emma sends me a card every Mother's Day and every Christmas, but I don't open them. Whatever she has to say to me now is 20 years too late and several crimes too few. She had her chance to be my daughter, and she chose to be my enemy instead. I'm not interested in giving her another opportunity to hurt me. People sometimes ask me if I regret how things ended between us, if I wish I'd been more forgiving, or more willing to overlook her behavior for the sake of preserving our relationship. The answer is always no. Emma didn't just disagree with my choices, or express anger about feeling deceived. She committed crimes against me, destroyed my reputation, and demonstrated that she viewed our relationship as purely transactional. I spent 24 years teaching Emma that love meant sacrificing your own needs for someone else's benefit, that family loyalty meant protecting people from the consequences of their choices, and that maternal devotion meant absorbing abuse without fighting back. Those lessons created a young woman who believed she was entitled to whatever she wanted from me, regardless of how she treated me in return. Emma's imprisonment and the destruction of our relationship taught both of us a different lesson: that love without respect is just exploitation, that family loyalty without mutual consideration is just enabling, and that maternal devotion without boundaries is just self-destruction. I'm proud of the woman I've become since Emma forced me to choose between being a good mother and being a person with dignity and self-respect. I chose dignity, and while that choice cost me my daughter, it gave me back my self-worth and taught me that some relationships are more damaging than beneficial. The foundation I started with Emma's settlement money has helped over 300 young adults learn about financial responsibility and the importance of earning what they receive. Many of them come from families where money was used as a weapon or where financial boundaries were unclear. They learn about budgeting, saving, and the satisfaction that comes from achieving goals through their own efforts rather than through manipulation or family connections. Sometimes I see something of Emma in these young people, the same sense of entitlement, or the same assumption that family wealth should be freely available to them, regardless of their behavior or choices. But, unlike Emma, they're willing to learn different values when those values are presented with clear boundaries and consistent consequences. Last month, one of the program participants, a 22-year-old named Jennifer, whose parents had hidden family wealth until she turned 18, thanked me for teaching her about the importance of financial independence. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, "I used to be angry with my parents for not telling me about our family money when I was younger. But now I understand that they were trying to teach me to value my own achievements. I'm grateful they made me work for what I have instead of just giving me everything I wanted." Jennifer will never know that her words validated every choice I made with Emma, every boundary I set, every consequence I allowed her to experience. She'll never know that her gratitude helped heal wounds that I thought would never stop hurting. Emma is 30 years old now and working as a waitress at a chain restaurant in Portland, Oregon, where her father still lives. According to Rebecca, who occasionally provides unwanted updates about Emma's life, she struggled to find steady employment because of her criminal record and the publicity from our legal battle. She lives in a small apartment with 2 roommates and has been making minimum payments on her restitution obligations for the past 4 years. Rebecca thinks I should feel sorry for Emma, should reach out and offer to help her get back on her feet. But I learned something important during our conflict. Feeling sorry for someone who hurt you doesn't obligate you to continue letting them hurt you. Emma chose her path when she chose to escalate our disagreement into a criminal matter. The fact that she doesn't like where that path led her doesn't create any obligation for me to help her find a different one. I drive past the cemetery where my mother is buried every few weeks, and I sometimes stop to visit her grave. I tell her about the foundation, about the young people we're helping, about the life I've built since Emma forced me to choose between being respected and being used. "You were right, Mom," I tell her headstone. "Money doesn't buy love or loyalty or respect. It just reveals who people really are when they think they can get away with taking advantage of you." My mother's inheritance taught Emma that she felt entitled to things she hadn't earned and relationships she hadn't nurtured. But it taught me something more valuable, that self-respect is worth more than family harmony, that boundaries are more important than keeping peace, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to protect them from the consequences of their choices. Emma wanted to teach me a lesson about honesty and family obligations. Instead, she taught me about the difference between being a good mother and being a doormat, between unconditional love and unconditional enabling, between family loyalty and self-destruction. I'm grateful for those lessons, even though they cost me my daughter, because they gave me back myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.